Hey guys, welcome to my presentation on my board game, Revolt, which focuses on the events of the German Peasants' War of 1525. If you've played it, it's loosely based around the Star Wars board game Imperial Assault, where 3 Rebel players play against 1 Imperial player. But instead of Star Wars, we're now talking about German peasants. So, in the same vein as Imperial Assault, I decided to go with 3 players as the peasants and 1 player as the Swabian League, which is the coalition of German princes at the time who were putting down the revolts. Um, so, essentially, the purpose of the game for the peasants is to capture 5 cities, and the purpose of the game for the Swabian League is to just completely annihilate the peasants. So, for simplicity's sake, I decided to go with a game board that's just a 10 by 10 grid. And so on every other row, the Fabian League decides where to place cities. So while geographically inaccurate, of course, I think that I decided that that went better with the game, and then I used the names of the cities and the importance of them as direct correlations to the main battles of the German Peasants' War. So the cities that I decided to go with were Leipheim, Weinsberg, Böblingen, Königshofen, and Freiburg. So Leipheim was the first battle in which the Swabian League really kicked their army into gear and came down hard on the peasants. And so in reality, they got destroyed during that battle. But I was thinking about what if they had somehow managed to win, and then we would actually have, you know, a real chance on their hands, you know. Um, and so, also, that battle took place only a month before Martin Luther published the document, and so I decided that's the perfect place to start the game and focus on the most intense moments of the revolt. And then also, Freiburg is the most significant peasant victory in the entire revolt, and is one of the one of the only cities that they were actually able to capture. And even though they got destroyed again after that battle, they were able to secure the city, and so I decided that that's a good place to end the game because I can leave it open-ended and up to interpretation. So even though I mess with contingency a little bit, I'm not being completely ahistorical. Since I don't have an actual physical game to show you, I won't get into the specifics of attack values and defense values or whatever, but I'll give you a rundown of the units. So if you're playing as peasants, you get rural peasants, urban peasants, and deserters, which were all too common actually. So part of the reason the Swabian League took a while to mobilize is because they didn't want to call up armies from among their province because they were like, well, what if they desert? And the princes who actually did that, commonly, those armies that went to fight the peasants in the first place actually ended up deserting and joining the peasants. So I thought that was really interesting. I decided to put it in the game. So rural peasants, low attack but high health because there's so many of them. Urban peasants, um, people who used to live in the city but got kicked out of the social ladder by the up and coming merchant class. They have a bit higher attack value because they're better equipped, but lower numbers, so lower health. And then deserters have cannons, so they're ranged and have a little bit higher attack, but lower health because there's not as many of them as the massive numbers of peasants. And then on the side of the Swabian League, I decided to go with the Landsknechts. So the Swabian League, who didn't want to, make an army out of the people who live in their towns and might desert, normally paid these elite, famed German mercenaries, the Landsknechts, who were really, really strong military units during this time and played a very important role, an integral role in the wars of religion later on. And so I decided to give them super high attack values, but pretty medium health because at the beginning the Swabian League didn't have a lot of money to put together to hire the mercenaries. And then the last unit that the Swabian League gets to control um, joined the, the war, I guess, somewhat late after the capture of Leipheim, and that's Trux's army. So Truxis was a major, I don't know, general, leader, we'll just say leader of the Swabian League forces, and won so many battles against the peasants and just completely annihilated them to the point that they gave him the name the Scourge of the Peasants. So I figured I cannot have a game about the German Peasants' War without that dude in it. So those are the units that they play with: 3 peasant armies and 2 armies that the Swabian League controls. So again, I won't get into the specifics about how to actually capture the castle. It's just a matter of throwing the right dice. But for the events of it and the historical decisions I made, I'll give you a brief run through of that. So at the end of round 2, or when Leipheim is captured, there's an event that triggers called Enemies in High Places, and that's when Martin Luther publishes uh, against the murdering, thieving hordes of peasants. He decries the actions of them and says, "Slaughter those peasants," and that's when Tuxis's army comes into play, and they spawn adjacent to the space where Freiburg is. And then, but for the peasants, each time a city is captured, there's an event that gets triggered called Promising Freedom. The success of the peasants has been so inspiring for those who have fallen on hard times, all too common in this era. And so I didn't want to give them another army because I figured that would complicate things. But I did decide to, when that event triggers, to restore the deserter army to full health. Likewise, when 3 cities have been captured by the peasants, there's an event that triggers. The situation has become dire. Excuse me. The Swabian League, enraged at the success of the peasants, has finally decided to figure out to come to terms, put their money together, and hire more troops. Again, didn't want to spawn another army of Landsknechts, because I figured that'd be really complicated. But just to restore them to full health and replenish their numbers, so to speak. And then Freiburg, the most important battle. If it's captured, the peasants win. The future may still look bleak, but those victories have emboldened your armies and caused many to become sympathetic to your cause. So I figured if the peasants had actually, won time and time again, then more peasants in other areas may have joined their cause, and of course they probably would have gotten defeated. But what if they didn't? So I left it kind of open-ended with the caveat that you'll probably lose in the future, but you get to rest happy now you won the game. If the peasants are defeated before Freiburg is captured, then the Swabian League wins. It seems the might of trained professionals was too much for the loose band of peasant armies. The Swabian League has come away victorious, but at what cost? What portents does this revolt bear for the future? So, the German Peasants' War is largely considered to be the greatest revolt against authority before the European revolt before the French Revolution. And so I decided that even though it's largely considered to be a victory for the princes, the peasants, they didn't have military success, but they had some ideological success. They set the precedent for what would be possible, and they helped give an idea about what the French Revolution could be. A lot of the historiography that I was reading through, I actually read one source by Engels about it, the socialist, and talking about how it was a landmark victory for the social class and inspired everyone. And so I decided to give that a little bit of merit in the final event of the board game. Even if the princes win, then the peasants have their small ideological victories. So I don't want to be overly complicated or waste a lot of your time. So I'll end it here. But that is my game, Revolt.